Good morning, and it was such a beautiful weekend. The weather on the coast was perfect. Everybody had a thoroughly enjoyable time, except for people like myself who spent the weekend watching the Constitutional Conference on television. And I come in here this morning and I whip myself into a frenzy and I say, ho-hum. It looks like we're going to have a single-parent constitution if Pierre Elliott Trudeau can get away with it. But it won't be a nice, quiet move by Pierre, who doesn't look like he's going to be dissuaded, because I have in front of me now one of the leaked secret documents for the eyes of federal Liberal cabinet ministers only. And in that, which predicts the trouble and the possibility of failure, it says, in the event unilateral action becomes necessary, ministers, that's Liberal cabinet ministers, should understand that the fight in Parliament and the country will be very, very rough. And then it goes on to quote our dear friend, not Mr. Trudeau, but Machiavelli. Now, when you look at the conference and your mind is just buzzing with all the backbiting and anger and you scratch mine and I'll scratch you and I'll scratch your face, you've got to try and reduce it to kind of basic thoughts. And the first thing that absolutely baffles me, we don't know the whole score yet. There's been no release of that consensus document at the famous Friday morning breakfast, which Trudeau accepted as an ultimatum and said no. He said, no, I will not accept a draft preamble which says Canada is a free association of provinces. That's the basis on which he has fought Lévesque. And we've got to find out from Premier Bennett and from Premier Lougheed, particularly Premier Bennett, what the devil that means, the free association of provinces. Does that give, or would that give, Newfoundland or British Columbia or Alberta or Quebec, of course, the right to self-determination? Is it that loose a federation the premiers are proposing? In any case, Trudeau came out as a tough guy with a quick answer. Lougheed and Pickford and Bennett came out as tough guys, but once Trudeau had wiped the floor with them, they didn't look all that good, but they may still be right. I don't know, for instance, when Trudeau said that he would not accept a council of provinces which had the right of veto over federal legislation, if he was interpreting it properly. Because my information from Victoria this morning is that that wasn't quite what the Vancouver-Alberta Chateau Laurier Accord was about the Council of Provinces. That in fact it was merely a temporary limited area of control in 6 points of provincial interest for the Council of Provinces. What are we going to have now? We could have an Alberta referendum, we could have a national referendum, but one thing is quite clear about Trudeau. One, he won't accept a compromise which includes the free association of provinces. And I wonder, how could even Premier Bennett stand there and say that he suddenly now believes that Lévesque, whose determination is to smash the country, make no bones about it, is now negotiating in good faith because of the fear, I presume, Webster, not Bennett, of electoral defeat of some time in the province of Quebec. But one other thing is clear. I happen to be with Blakeney in the business of not enshrining all our civil rights into a constitution US style. But I'm certainly facing the fact that if you're going to bring Quebec into Confederation and keep it into Confederation, you've got to entrench French and English rights across the country, and you must, because of the developments in Newfoundland and elsewhere, make freedom of movement for jobs across the country a constitutional right. Enough of that. Later in the program, we're going to have something about that. But first I want to introduce, or rather to tell you about my first guest this morning, who is Dennis McDermott, the president of the Canadian Labour Congress of Canada, a man on the verge of a fight to the death with the Building Trades Council unions in Quebec and in British Columbia, where, of course, we've got the confrontation between the I.W.A. and the Building Trades Council at Duke Point, and more to come, and the incredible situation at Whistler, where the building trade unions are cutting their own throats and trying to make it a total closed town. On the program this morning too, fresh from the constitutional failures, will be the Federal Energy Minister Marc Lalonde. And in the programme this morning too is an NDP MP from Kamloops, whom we haven't met before, by the name of Nelson Riis. And I'll be back with a Dennis McDermott story and his ultimatum to the building trades unions after this break. The Executive Council of the Canadian Labour Congress meets in Vancouver this week. And yesterday I tackled Dennis McDermott, the president of the CLC, on this burgeoning, favourite word these days, labour crisis between the I.W.A. on the Duke Point issue and the Building Trades Council, who want to have jurisdiction for the whole world. The I.W.A. won't let them. There's also the Whistler caper. My first question to McDermott. Dennis McDermott, that you're sick and tired of this jurisdictional fighting within your own organisation between the building trades councils and unions like the I.W.A., and you're going to have to get off your back, to be blunt, and do something to solve it.
Yeah, I guess it's true that I'm sick and tired of it. It's one of those characteristics of the labor movement that I don't enjoy. I guess it's inevitable. In the case of this building trades dispute, it involves just more than just the I.W.A.
Well, let's just spell it out. You've got 400,000 members of the building trades councils across the country, leaders of whose international unions have withdrawn their per capita and might very well nearly put the CLC in penury.
No, they won't do that. They'll have a serious effect on our income, but obviously if they're permitted to do what they're doing now with impunity, that's going to have a long-term effect on the income of the CLC. It involves a great deal more than just the I.W.A. As a matter of fact, astonishing as it may sound, I do not at this moment know what they want. I have no bill of particulars. I've had no list of demands. I know that they're out because they're disenchanted about this and that and something else. But I have not had one piece of communication, not one phone call, not one letter, not one telegram.
From anybody in the building trades in British Columbia or Quebec or anywhere across the country?
Anywhere.
Let me restate the facts, quite simply put. We're interested in Quebec to a point, but we know that in British Columbia there's a head-and-head confrontation coming between the BC and Yukon Building Trades Council over the Duke Point dispute, where the I.W.A. cocked a snoot at both the Building Trades Council and the Labour Board and said, we ain't getting off this job, we are finishing the job. Now that's the situation in BC. We now have a situation whereby the Building Trades Council are trying to create closed villages, not just closed sites. Do you approve of their technique either in Duke Point or at a place called Whistler?
Well, I'm not knowledgeable about Duke Point or the other place that you mentioned, so I can't.
But you're knowledgeable about the clash between the I.W.A. and the Building Trades Council.
Of course, and that's a 23-year-old dispute that's been going on for a long, long time.
Explain it for the benefit of listeners. What is the reason for this clash?
Well, it started a long time ago when the I.W.A. organized people that were traditionally in the construction trades in the interior because the construction unions were not interested in doing it. And of course that forms a relationship and a cementing of relationship that's continued up until recent times. And I think really the whole problem is that this is what happens in times of scarcity, economic downturn, high unemployment. Then the competition for jobs increases, and then you have the resurrection of 23-year-old disputes like this one in Quebec. That's a big part of the building trade disenchantment. That dispute is 10 years old. But you see, in addition to that, it's not just a question of jurisdictional dispute or competition over jobs. A big part of the building trades disenchantment is with the form of representation that we have at our CLC conventions. They would like to have it like the AFL-CIO.
Which is what?
Which is where the affiliate pays the per capita to the National Labor Center, and the affiliate unilaterally pick their own delegates. We don't do that. None of them come from local unions. None of them come from rank and file.
You mean their delegates?
That's right.
Under the the building trades in the States, none of the delegates come from local unions or rank and file.
No,
they're all nominated by the
all the
International.
delegates to the AFL-CIO convention are staff people and people that are selected by the affiliates themselves. They're not elected to anything.
Well, this builds
The
up
diametric opposite of what we do here in the CLC.
Well, back to the original dispute. We've got industrial unions like the I.W.A, which are certified on a job for all the trades within that plant. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the international unions, we'll call them the American international unions, who have the different trades certified in different areas, working as a building trades council.
Mm-hmm.
That's a basic conflict, is it not?
Yeah, part of it is in the structure, but the conflict is really over the allocation of work or competition for work. Now, I don't really know. It looks to me as if we're supposed to roll the clock back to day one, and all of the building trades work will go to the traditional building trades unions, and all of the industrial union work will go to the industrial unions. But then what happens to an organization like the IBEW?
Well,
Which is basically a craft union, but has a big percentage of its membership in industrial plants. Now, are they willing to turn over the industrial plants that they have back to the traditional industrial union in exchange for this
No.
building trades work that they're asking for?
You can best
there's no.
demonstrate that to the viewers by telling them what has happened in Quebec, where Louis Laberge has got a number of dissident electrical workers from the building trades unions organized by his charters and accepted by you in defiance of the internationals, right?
Yeah, well, not accepted by us because we really haven't accepted them. That has to do with, again, that's a dispute that was 10 years old, and they were voluntarily, the IBEW 10 years ago, acquiesced to their separation in Quebec, and they formed an independent chartered body, and they've been that way for over 10 years now. There is legislation pending in Quebec because the same thing happened there as I think happened out here. Because of all of the fuss and bother that was going on in the construction industry, the government came down with the Cliche investigation, if you remember.
Organized crime and labor
Now they're
unions.
required to be organized on a provincial-wide basis and to bargain provincially and so on to avoid all of the leapfrogging. So Laberge is pretty well obligated under that pending legislation to do this anyway, whether he likes it or whether he doesn't.
We might get the same legislation in British Columbia to prevent the I.W.A getting involved in a knockdown, drag-out fight with the Building Trades Council.
Very possible. Every time you have so many fights that starts to interfere with the overall common good, then you can expect legislation. That's the way it happens.
Could be a form of right-to-work legislation.
Well, I hope not, but it could be.
Well, what are you going to do? You've lost, technically speaking, 400,000 members of the building trades across the country from the CLC, correct?
Mm-hmm.
They've withdrawn their capita.
Yeah.
Are you going to expel them from the CLC?
What we're going to do is to make every good effort to try and work it out on an amicable basis, even if that means going through the international honchos in Washington and meeting with them. And after a reasonable period of time, we're going to try and work it out. If we're not able to work it out, I am convinced that there is a sufficient amount of rank-and-file local union sentiment who are not in support of this unilateral action that was pulled together by a small number of people. They've indicated to me that they want to stay in the Canadian Labour Congress. And if we're not able to work this out, then I'm going to open the doors and let them in. And the building trades have to understand the repercussions of that.
Well, I want to understand them too, because I've got in my hand a CLC understanding between the building trades and industrial unions of April 25, 1980, signed among by other people, no less a person than Jack Monroe and Ray Gauthier, who's the guy who's leading the fight here right now. That's been a flop.
Yeah, it came together on paper very well. And then almost shortly thereafter, the resignations came in, and the document means nothing.
The resignations of the building trades councils from the CLC.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You said to me you're going to open the doors and let them in. Now, Mr. McDermott, you've been around a long while. Spell that out for labour union leaders who are watching this program, especially from the Building Trades Council and the I.W.A.
To those people who have communicated to me, and there are many of them, including many here in BC, it simply means that if they're not satisfied with what their unions are doing and they want to remain in the Canadian Labour Congress, then the Canadian Labour Congress will make the accommodation to bring them in. If that means setting up a competitive, separate structure, then so be it. I don't want that. I want to be able to try and work it out in an amicable way. But if it comes to the crunch, I'm prepared to recommend to my council that we do that.
You're telling me that you're prepared to make charters available for dissident building trades members and unions to affiliate directly with the CLC and behave in a decent manner?
That's right.
And the back of your hand to the building trades union leadership across the country?
If it comes to that, I said that I want desperately to try and work it out. But if we're not able to work it out, then I don't think we're going to permit the building trades to just stay out of the Congress with impunity.
A veiled ultimatum from Dennis McDermott. Wouldn't you say so? Even I could interpret it as that, couldn't I?
I think you might interpret it that way.
A veiled ultimatum. Because you're afraid of the public reaction if these unions like the I.W.A. and the Building Trades Councils cut each other's throat, it will lead to right to work laws in BC.
Mm-hmm.
More with Dennis McDermott after the break. Second. 20 seconds. Get that quite clear. Dennis McDermott, top man in the CLC, says, and it wasn't veiled that much, unless this jurisdictional dispute is withdrawn or disappears through negotiation, and the building trade unions are socially acceptable, he'll recommend setting up locals to raid them. Next question. I hate to mention the subject of the Constitution, but I don't know where your Louis Laberge or the Quebec Federation of Labour stands on it. I don't know if you, as the biggest union leader in the country, has any idea where this country's going, because you've still got much opposition from unions in Quebec. They don't want this one country. Am I correct?
I'm not sure I interpret it that way.
What about Laberge? Where does he stand?
There is a difference in Quebec, and Laberge is a Quebecois. And if I were in his shoes, I think I'd probably be behaving like him.
But do you stand for the one country using Quebec labour, or would it not matter to you if they went?
Oh, no, of course I stand for one country. But I also am very much for self-determination for the Quebecois, because I think that they have 100 years of accumulated real grievances, and the rest of the country has to make some accommodations.
So you're saying if they want to go, let them go, if they voted democratically?
No, well, I'm saying that they have the right to determine whether they want to stay or whether they want to go.
And that applies to CNTU and your locals and the people of Quebec in general?
Of course, yeah.
Well, you look at this country today. What kind of state is it in? We in the West, our unemployment is down. Our wage rates seem to go up by leaps and bounds. What was it the Building Trades Council got? $3.50 over 2 years, plus fringe benefits coming out their ears? Is it as good in the rest of the country?
Well, it varies. I guess Alberta's doing pretty well, too. You know, we have our have provinces and we have our have-not provinces. That was a big part of the debate at that marathon jawbone session that we've just witnessed that closed a day or so ago. I'm glad it's all over, because what I'm looking forward to now is all of those big political honchos that were wagging their jowls around that session in Ottawa for 2 weeks. I have an outlandish idea.
Give me it.
That they ought now to start to implement all of those nice election promises they made to us during the election, like doing something about the economy, like the creation of secondary industries, like the creation of an industrial strategy, like doing something about interest rates and their escalation, doing something about energy prices. Ye gods, you know, the construction business is just about at a standstill in most of the country. Unemployment is at an unprecedented high. The country's going to hell in a basket economically, and we're sitting around chasing the damn Constitution. Now, the Constitution may be important, but it seems to me that the welfare, the economic welfare of the country is much, much more important. And there's many things to be done, but we are sitting here. That government has been elected how long now? They criticized the Conservatives for no budget within 6 months. They've taken longer. I want to see these characters go to work. I'm fed up with this sophisticated political scam, if you wish, to get our minds off of those things that ought to be preoccupying our minds.
But right now, Trudeau wanted to change the balance of economic power in the country. He wanted some powers to increase his hold over the economy, and they said, no way. And the other thing, of course, is that Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia are subsidizing your protected, tariff-protected, secondary industries in the East to the tune of $3-some billion a year. Is it fair that the West, which has just found its wealth, should suddenly have to keep low prices for you people in Ontario and the Maritimes?
You don't just keep low prices for the people in Ontario, you keep them for yourself, too. I mean, what the hell? If you got a strawberry patch in your backyard, you don't pay the same price as somebody 3,000 miles away who's never seen a strawberry. And there's no reason why we have to maintain world prices. I mean, the provinces, the energy-producing provinces can make their measure of profit. They can have all of their heritage funds. Everybody can be happy. But this nonsense of placing the energy crisis on the backs of the consumer is just totally unfair.
Don't you think the biggest kind of pity at the moment is that we don't have a government which is nationally representative of all of the country?
That's true.
I mean, we're all represented, but there isn't a Liberal west of Lakehead.
You people out here didn't give him much of a chance, did you?
No, we didn't like him at the time, but his image on television may have helped him again because he's a master at his own image, isn't he?
Yeah, he sure is.
What do you make of, I'll give you a chance to scream and holler. We did a story on the other day about these poor immigrant workers. They're brought in here as immigrants. They have to work for a contractor for 25 consecutive days so they can qualify down the line for some unemployment insurance. They pay, what's the percentage? 25 to 30% of their wages to the contractor. They live in hovels. Their kids drown with unfailing regularity in pools and buckets of water. How is this tolerated in this country today? You certainly have failed in doing anything to help the farm workers.
Well, I wouldn't say that because just about a year ago, when that nucleus of migrant farm workers started to form out here, we put in some pretty heavy subsidies. We're still doing that now. We have an organization. I worked with Cesar Chavez, in California a number of years ago, and this is sort of a repeat performance of what happened down there. And you're right. It's an obligation. It's a challenge to the labor movement. We absolutely have to do something about it. But I think, too, that the labor movement should not be held singularly, solely responsible for this. Surely the politicians and everybody else in society ought to be equally concerned about it.
But you're the only people, really, if you stick to your principles, interested in helping these people.
That's always the case, isn't it?
No, it's not always the case.
I'd like to see the Upper Canada Law Society and the Law Society out here and the CMA and the Chamber of Commerce and all these other institutions be equally concerned the way we are.
Don't expect it from them, though,
about
do you?
The plight of people.
It's like the way you dragged your feet in organizing the farm workers, the bank workers. You really dragged your feet on that, didn't you?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think we dragged our feet at all. We have a lot of energetic people out there working very hard with single-minded devotion on this. But when you tackle the bank, you're getting right to the guts of the establishment, and they fight like hell.
They sure put up the wages when you began to organize them, too, didn't they?
Yeah.
Any successes to speak of?
Oh, yeah, we have a lot of branches organized across the country now, and we have a lot of collective agreements. Some of them are coming up now for the third year, or third time.
Yeah, you're an NDP, of course, to trade.
Yeah.
And your own trade, your own union was a... Come on.
Auto workers. U.A.W.
They're all unemployed now.
No, they're not. Not all of them. They're suffering, they're hurting.
Not a thing you can do to help them.
Well, not until we get those people that want a jawbone about the Constitution back into doing the job that they were elected to do and start to get the economy rolling, because the automobile industry is a linchpin of the Canadian economy, and when they're not working, a lot of other people don't work either,
all right,
including all the supplying industries.
I must get your veiled ultimatum correct. Unless these jurisdictional problems between the building trades councils and the craft unions across the country, talking particularly about BC, can be solved with reasonable dispatch, you will recommend to your executive that the CLC go to the unhappy membership and say, hey, we'll give you your own charters and get rid of this nonsense.
That's right.
No kidding.
That's what I've said, yeah.
Just by the way, the Labour Board is going to be handing down its decision this morning on the Whistler Mountain kerfuffle between the Building Trades Council and the non-unionists. Later in the programme, we're going to have Marc Lalonde on the Constitution. Next, we're going to chat up an MP I've never seen before, Nelson Riis, NDP from Kamloops, after the break.
Half a cup would be fine. Yeah, that makes it.
Nelson Riis is the NDP MP for Kamloops. First session.
First session, Jack.
Expertise is in small business.
Well, that's my growing expertise in small business. Yes, it's an area that the NDP hasn't been that active in over the years, and I'm changing that now.
Background as a school trustee and an alderman of the city of Kamloops.
Yes.
Who was it you knocked off, just as a matter of gossip?
I mean, in the last election?
Yeah.
A fellow by the name of Don Cameron, Conservative candidate, and he was the incumbent. Very short-lived in terms of the short.
Have you been able to get any of your NDP legal friends any business out of the government?
No, I'm not into that, Jack.
You're not concerned with that?
No.
Nelson, give me an offhand reaction to this failure in Ottawa on Saturday morning.
Well, when we went in, I was an official observer at the talks, and Friday there was a real feeling of optimism, and I think everyone felt that this was going to be it, that the people out there were wanting this thing to be wrapped up. The federal government had given on a whole list of points. The provinces were indicating that they were prepared to be doing some changing and prepared to give, and I suspect it was that fateful breakfast meeting when the premiers essentially said, no, let's get together, and we're going to go in there with the united front and take Trudeau on, and that, I think, is what killed the whole thing.
I suppose so, but perhaps you heard what I said this morning about my amazement that the premiers could agree with anything as a free association of provinces with Quebec.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think, you know, Quebec's under a different sort of thing right now, Jack. He's got to face the electorate, and I think he's sensitive, and it's a very fine line that he has to walk right now. He has to get re-elected, and he's got to moderate his position somewhat and give the impression he's prepared. He gave it a good try, and it worked for him perfectly.
Do you think the man in the pub in Kamloops, of the housewife in Barnhart Vale, or Barriere, or any of these places, gives a damn about the Constitution?
Yes, I do. I'm perhaps an odd man.
You mean
out in
to
that
say
respect.
they're sitting there and saying, let's have two more, let's discuss the question of whether or not provinces should be allowed to opt out of an enshrined Bill of Rights?
I'm convinced that the people of Canada are interested in the future of this country, really interested, like they never had before, particularly in terms of what their children are going to be doing and what kind of opportunities will be existing. They know, I think in their hearts, that the Constitution has something to do with that future. They haven't got a clue what's in it. They haven't got a clue what's going on. And why should they? The whole thing's been done behind closed doors right from the very beginning, closeted away in Ottawa with a group of people going on and on for days on end and making it very unintelligible for anybody that's viewing or listening in to follow. I was sitting there for the entire week, and I must admit I had to fight to kind of keep on top of this whole thing. And I would say that I am.
Are you prepared to campaign as a reasonably intelligent politician on the fact that there's no way Quebec will stay in Confederation unless you enshrine French rights in the Constitution for the rest of the country and English rights in Montreal?
No question about that. No
do you think the
question
man
about
in the
that.
pub gives a damn? How do you think the man in the pub will react?
Well, the man in the pub will react, I think, in a positive way if they know what the issues are. If they know what the options are, what alternative is there, Jack? Of course, if we have two languages in Canada, it has to be enshrined. Look at our own province. Our track record isn't even that great here, and yet our Premier holds it up as the example of a successful program. It hasn't been successful, and God knows, as you say, in Montreal it has not been successful. That's one aspect, I think, that should in fact be enshrined, of course.
Well, naturally, I'm a new Canadian by definition, but when I see Peckford sitting there and saying offshore oil rights, and Bennett supporting him, I know the amount of tongue-in-cheek that goes on in there. And when I hear Trudeau saying, look, he says, I've promised them 100% of provincial revenues until they have provinces.
Yes.
I think to myself, if Trudeau is reporting it accurately, it's not a bad deal for Newfoundland.
No, it's not a bad deal for Newfoundland because it's going to take a federal presence in those offshore waters sooner or later, or in one form or another, and that'll be conducted by the federal government. And quite frankly, I agree that Pecker's position is perhaps a little bit too extreme.
Mind you,
Bennett supports him for obvious reasons. They've got to make these bloody deals, and I think that's been the problem. The assumption has been, if the provinces all agree, it must be in the best interest of Canada. Well, hell, the provinces could agree to divvy up the armed services and so on. Well, it's not in the best interest.
We don't know what the provinces actually agreed to on that Saturday morning. All we know is that Trudeau said, they gave me an ultimatum and I told them to keep it.
Yes.
He said no.
Yeah, well, Jack, isn't that the problem with the whole talks? Nobody really understands what's been going on. No one really understands the various options that have been placed out. And that's where I think that people like myself have not had the opportunity we should have had. 282 members could have been across this country attempting to inform people what the issues are. What are the options?
Well, you probably would be in favour of some massive constituent assembly to start the whole thing all over again.
Well, not quite that. But I tell you what I would favor is that, and that is a few weeks of an opportunity now, particularly if Parliament is going to be recalled to discuss this, to take the issue to the small communities in my riding. And for those people that are interested, and I suspect there are much greater numbers than we anticipate, to sit down and so that I can accurately reflect the views of my constituents back in the House of Commons.
Do you go along with the general proposition by the Premiers that the two leaked documents showed the callous and cynical strategy of the federal government?
It was a
bound for failure?
No. Let's face it, I'm sure that every provincial premier there had his own secret document identifying the options depending on how things were going to go. Unfortunately, it was leaked or got out in some way or another, and I think it put a dampening on the mood for perhaps a few hours. But let's face it, if you're honest with yourself, everybody had those options in their own form or one way or another.
I'm going to have to cut you fairly short this morning because I see I've got Marc Lalonde on the wings, but before I go, Kamloops.
Yes.
What have you done for them so far?
Well, let's, I guess to be totally frank, Jack, as a new member, it takes a little while to learn how to operate effectively within the system, to learn how to be an effective and efficient opposition member so that not only the country benefits, but also the riding.
And you're here,
I'm learning that.
You're here for a start of a provincial NDP caucus tour?
Yes, that's right. The NDP members of Parliament are touring the province, fact-finding, getting some reaction before Parliament sits the middle of October.
See you again, Nelson Riis.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for coming out this morning. Next, Marc Lalonde, the Federal Minister of Energy, on you know what, after the break.
Oh, such a nice guy.
Sure. Have you got time? Are you going to do a shot on camera for the news? Before I turn to the Energy Minister, I have a bulletin from Anton Kosheny from the Labour Board. Does the decision of the Labour Board this morning mean that the building trades unions at Whistler's will go back to work?
Cy Sloan from the Vancouver New Westminster Building Trades Council says that his people will go back to work this morning. Will go back to work.
So that's the crisis off for the moment.
However, the decision, the people here, they're standing around waiting for the decision, and they're standing around muttering that Ron Bone has really not issued any decision.
What does he say in effect?
The decision is that basically he says the Whistler town site is one integrated construction project, so he buys the argument, I guess, that it's like Duke Point. But then he says that having made the assumption, I've nevertheless decided that the non-affiliation or reservations clauses in the contracts are not enforceable at the present time under the circumstances of the case. He says that there was the evidence showed that there was implied agreement to the presence of some non-union labor at the town center, that there is no present need to provide work for union members, and says that it's been a good construction year so the people have got jobs. And then the employers are the ones who are suffering, so that the unions can't use an argument that they need the security of the work. Okay,
he's given them jurisdiction and all the union stuff, but he hasn't closed the village and the golf course and whatnot as common sites.
That's right.
Okay, we'll hear from you later, Anton. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay, Jack.
Well, hold on and talk to the news, would you, please? I'll put it on hold. Excuse the interruption, Mr. Lalonde. I don't know why you should be smiling at all this morning.
Well, if you're in politics, you have to be an optimist. If you're a pessimist, I think you better resign very quickly. I think people have to look at things in perspective, and I think this country will sail through its current difficulties very well indeed.
After another 20 years?
Well, you know, you look, compare around the world and find me a better country than Canada. And,
in the event...
then everybody else is envying Canada, so I don't see why we should be so pessimistic.
Is the Prime Minister now committed to unilateral action by the end of the year?
He
to
said
repatriate the Constitution?
He said that he would consult his caucus and his cabinet. Obviously, you know, you have to review the situation after the conference, and I expect he'll announce a decision very shortly. What exactly the decision will be, I'm not in a position to say.
Can you explain to me, this is an opening, a lead question in which you can explode, how the 9 other provincial premiers could come to an agreement with René Lévesque, the separatist, with a draft preamble that says Canada is a free association of provinces?
Well, the premiers themselves did not reach that agreement. As you know, it was done at the official level and I think maybe at the ministerial level at the last minute when they met at the end of August. I don't remember that the 9 other premiers would subscribe to this theory or this notion, as a matter of fact.
Saturday morning on the television, Premier Trudeau said that he could not...
Prime Minister Trudeau.
Prime Minister Trudeau then. Trudeau said that he could not accept a draft preamble from the ultimatum from the ministers, unanimous, that we are a free association of provinces. They must have come to that agreement.
Well, if they did, and as I say, I wasn't party to private discussions that may have taken place, but I think then Prime Minister Trudeau was very right indeed. The notion that this country is composed of a free association of provinces or provincial governments is just not correct and does not correspond to the reality of this country. This country is more than just an association of provinces. It is a nation. It is a unity as a country, and it was built up over the years, starting with a limited, smaller number of provinces, to which other provinces were added later on.
How long?
But the notion that provinces could walk in and walk out of this country like it were a train station is just horrendous when you think about it, and the implications of it are totally unacceptable. I can't believe that the premiers realized, the implications of what was being put forward, except René Lévesque. I'm sure he understood what was coming there.
Do you think he conned them?
I wouldn't be surprised, because the implications that can be read, and that I'm sure Lévesque read in this, you see, was that the self-determination of provinces, that any province could walk out of this country the day it fits it. Well, you can't have a country.
Premier Bennett said on television the other morning that he was very impressed with the sincerity and goodwill of René Lévesque in the talks. Would you be similarly impressed by any free association idea from Lévesque?
Not at all. And, a lot of premiers have not been dealing with René Lévesque day in, day out for years as we have. And I can't help feeling that a lot of them are being conned, and they have been conned in the past. I don't think they are very much aware of what René Lévesque has been up to in Quebec, and René Lévesque has not changed his objectives or his mind.
Which is what?
Québécois, independence, let's face it. And the Parti Québécois has not said that they had abandoned independence as their objective. As long as that party, headed by Mr. Lévesque, the president of the party is Mr. Lévesque, is not going to, at a convention, pass a resolution saying they abandoned independence or sovereignty association as an objective. That is still the objective of Mr. René Lévesque and that party, and nobody should be fooled by this. It's easy to be there on television and appear reasonable and all that, but you have to look at the facts.
You are one of the principal Liberal politicians in Quebec. I don't know quite what your status is in the Quebec caucus now, but
I'm still the leader of the Quebec wing.
Right, you're the leader of the Quebec wing of the party. The premiers refused to entrench the French and English language minority rights, all the civil rights, in one bunch, in their package. Does that mean that if this is not overcome, that independence or separation is bound to happen?
No, I don't think independence is bound to happen whether there's a Charter of Rights or or not. I think the question of a Charter of Rights or fundamental rights of Canadian citizens is one that stands on its own and should be adopted and supported on its own merits. I don't think putting a Charter of Rights is going to kill or to give a lot of fire to the independence movement.
Sure kills the Liberals in Quebec if they can't deliver an amended constitution with the minority rights entrenched, does it not?
Well, as you see, a lot of, Mr. Lévesque is against a Charter of Rights that would protect the English-speaking minority rights. you know, the French-speaking people in Quebec itself, do not need a Charter of Rights, linguistic rights as such. They are an overwhelming majority.
It's the English people who need it.
Absolutely. Just as the French-speaking minorities elsewhere also need those rights because they are a minority. And what we want to do, and what I think as a country we should rise up to, is this challenge to make sure that our linguistic minorities in this country will look to the future with confidence and see that their rights are enshrined, as well as the other fundamental rights that are so important to all citizens.
Well, quite frankly, Mr. Lalonde, I don't want a US-type constitution where my English common law civil rights are written down for a bunch of judges to tamper with. I don't mind the entrenchment of the minority language rights or the freedom to move to prevent Alberta and Newfoundland setting up little employment territories for their people, or Ontario, Quebec. But I'm not all that keen on having civil law American style, where you've got to change your constitution every time some judge does something stupid.
Well, you know, it's not necessarily going to the American system of judicial interpretation. But if you look at the record in this country, I think we could have been very well served by a Charter of Rights protecting citizens against the abuses of the federal and provincial governments. I think this is something that would have served this country well.
Didn't help the Americans much, did it?
It did indeed, in many instances.
100 years of extra slavery.
Oh, yes. But
despite their constitution.
Yes, but the courts have certainly expanded the liberties of the citizens against the states, the powers of governments in the United States. There's no doubt about it. And you know, those rights are put in a broad term. They still leave room for legislative action, but the citizen has always got the right to appeal to the court if he feels that the state is infringing on his own rights, and that is very important and very useful. Because on that basis, you know, we should abolish our own federal Charter of Rights, which I don't think, which Mr. Diefenbaker put in, and which I think we should enshrine and make sure that it's not going to be changed.
Well, it's whistling. We have to use an Americanism, whistling Dixie anyway, because there ain't no agreement.
Well, that is unfortunate indeed. It is very unfortunate. It's probably one of the saddest. It's a very sad development. It's probably one of the saddest elements of those discussions that you know, most provincial premiers, not all of them by any means, but most of them felt that we should entrust rights to politicians, federal and provincial politicians, and that was good enough. That putting them in the Constitution was something that we should be afraid of, and that we should be afraid of the courts rather than the politicians. But being a politician myself, I'm ready to trust the courts more than the politicians in the question of protecting rights.
See, this is where the English duality comes into the country. They'd rather trust the politicians than the courts, an evolving
No,
law.
I don't think it's a question English versus French. Mr. Hatfield, Mr. Davis, who I think are pretty Anglo-Saxons, are very strong in support of a Charter of Rights. And I will tell you that you have a lot of people in every province, a lot of people, academics, lawyers, plain citizens, journalists even, who will support and who support the notion of a Charter of Rights.
For language, yes. Movement across the country, yes. Control of the economy, it certainly is, yes.
Yes.
Common law, no.
Well, you see, you're already going half the way yourself with linguistic and mobility rights. That's not bad.
Energy Minister Lalonde on the latest crisis with Alberta. There must be one. There's one every day. After the break. Marc Lalonde would be the first to admit that one of the really impressive people at the conference and angry on the last day was Premier Lougheed of Alberta, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And that the energy policy is probably the greatest single thorn in Lougheed's side. To quote Lougheed, for years Alberta has patiently accepted all the necessary help for central Canada. And the moment comes that they see prosperity on the horizon, apart from the $3 billion subsidy which is used now to keep the price down across all the country, you are threatening them and have threatened them with an additional discriminatory tax. Is that correct?
Well,
I think,
if you look at the situation, you know, Mr. Lougheed tends to depict the situation in a very one-sided way, and that is very unfortunate. If you look at the history, you will find that it has not been 100 years or 75 years of Alberta being milked by central Canada or Ontario for all that. I was looking, for instance, recently at certain facts. When Alberta was set up, around 56% of its budget came from the federal government. They were recipient of support and money from central Canada for many years at the beginning. And later on, when it came to supporting the oil industries in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, most of Canada paid higher than world prices at the time to support the oil industry in Alberta. So it has not been a one-way street, that for 75 years Alberta has been helping the rest of the country, and now that they are becoming wealthy, the rest of the country is going for a big grab at them. What we have, what has happened is that Alberta has been helped by the rest of the country in the last 75 years. It has also contributed, like all other provinces. Now it is fortunate, and thanks to God having put oil and gas there, has become and thanks to OPEC also, because when it had oil and gas in 50s and 60s, it wasn't so good. Now it has become very, very, very wealthy, and it will be extremely wealthy for as far as we can see in the future. Now the question is, should a province that has got into such huge wealth and even larger wealth in the future, should it not be asked to share with the other Canadians?
But they can share an equalization. I mean, everybody agrees to equalization.
Sure.
You can have your pound of flesh for the underprivileged parts of the country, because we must have national schemes.
Yeah.
Surely from equalization, is it not a fact that Lougheed's argument is that you're changing the rules of, you're threatening to change the rules of the game now? How can he possibly develop his oil?
What are the rules of the game? The rules of the game are fundamentally that the better off in this country, the regions that are better off, will help those that are less well off. This has been the rule, the fundamental rule of the game, well, at least for the last 30 years and probably longer in this country. And this is the same rule that is being applied. Now you have to look, sure, you have to change some of the elements, because the situation is not always the same. It depends where, how it develops, what kind of wealth you're talking about.
But I'm talking about...
And essentially, whether it comes from resources, from trade or industry or something else, what you're talking about is wherever the wealth is coming from, there should be a mechanism for sharing it.
Are you still planning a specific discriminatory tax on natural gas, for instance, which would hit British Columbia, and oil, which would hit largely Alberta? Are you?
We're not planning discriminatory taxes. At the present time, the discrimination is in the fact that there is a tax on oil alone and not on other types of energy products. So what we have said, and this is following strong representations from provincial governments, particularly the government of Saskatchewan, for instance, who have said repeatedly that they were hurt and hit in a very, very discriminatory and hard way compared to other provinces and other petroleum-producing provinces, for instance. And they have also said, and Mr. Lougheed has said over the years, for instance, there you're taxing oil, but you wouldn't think of taxing electricity.
Right.
So we've said, okay, let's look at the whole situation and let's see whether a system can be devised that will be fairer.
You mean tax everything?
More fair
gas,
than the present system.
Oil, electricity.
Sure.
A federal tax on all forms of energy.
That's a thing that we said has to be looked at. There's no final decision that has been made, and no final decision will have been made until the budget is announced in the House, obviously. But indeed, that is the type of thing we have been and are looking at, because it has to be done in a fair way. And what we will arrive at in the end, I'm sure, and this is what the Minister of Finance is looking at currently very, very carefully, is a system that will be more fair or fairer than the one we have had up to now. But at the same time, obviously, there has to be a way found to make sure that the federal government, on behalf of all Canadians, has the resources necessary to help those that are more in need.
But
what we're looking at is fairness and equity. Look,
Canadians live in a fairyland of cheap gas, and Lougheed will tell you that unless he gets the realistic price for his oil, 85% of the Chicago price, is that it?
No, it's at 75%, according to the last offer.
Unless you've offered 75%.
No, he said that he would be ready to come down to 75% by 1984.
But even I can understand that unless he has the revenues to develop the expensive resources like not just the tar sands but the coal lake, I think you call it, he won't be able to supply jobs to his people.
Yeah. And we quite agree with that. We quite agree that the price of oil and gas has to go up.
How much has it gone up since you came into power? How much has the price of oil gone up since you came into power?
It has gone $2 last August. This will show at the pump in a few weeks, on the 1st of October roughly. It will go up by about 7 cents a gallon. And the price of oil is going up by 30 cents, 1,000 cubic feet on the 1st of October also.
Are these raises by Lougheed? Are these Lougheed's?
They have been raised by Lougheed, by the government of Alberta, and we have agreed with it. We said we would not contest it.
You still have not got a long-range oil agreement on prices with Lougheed?
That's right.
No agreement at the moment? He can do what he likes, really?
Well, it's always subject to the powers that the federal government has under the law. And as I said, when he decided to go for $2 on oil and 30 cents on gas, we said that as far as we were concerned, we were ready to go along with this kind of increase. But at the present time, there is no agreement. We are still hoping that there will be one before the budget, but we'll have to wait and see.
Webster and Marc Lalonde, Energy Minister, after the break. Just to demonstrate the difference between yourself and Mr. Leach, or Trudeau and Lougheed. Alberta wants the wellhead price of oil to 75% of the Chicago world price by January '84. That's about $37 a barrel.
I mean the total price?
Yeah.
Depending on the estimates, but
the federal government, you're $10 behind it. You'll go for $27 in January the 1st, 1984.
About that also, but we're also going to have additional taxes that would bring the federal government enough revenue to meet its obligations to the Canadian people. So as far as the taxes to the Canadian citizens, the cost to the Canadian citizens, there is still some difference. We want to have it going up, but slightly, at least slower.
Lloyd says he'd lose $10 billion on your formula.
Yeah, but what makes him assume that this $10 billion is his? You know, it's like when he goes around saying that the subsidies, the fact that they have been receiving less than world price over the last few years has meant a subsidy of X billions of dollars by the government of Alberta or the people of Alberta. You know, look at any other country around the world. The national government also has to have its stake in this. And I could make the same argument saying that this subsidy has come from the national government to the people of Canada, not from the government of Alberta.
What a pity the whole Constitution talks really collapsed, didn't it?
Yes, it is.
Makes your job more difficult, makes his job more difficult. However, Premier Bennett does not need to worry at the moment about a special tax on natural gas. Am I correct?
I understand he hopes that there will not be one. I don't know why. I have not given him any such indication. I said we're looking at the whole situation. The Minister of Finance is going to make its announcements in the budget, and obviously, you know, you wouldn't expect me to speculate on the budget.
We know what we're going to get when we get the budget sometime this fall.
Between the 15th and the 30th of October.
That's right. We don't know when the House is going back yet.
No, they were in principle the 15th of October.
I'm very impressed. The British Columbians are worried, those who look at the finances, about our drop in natural gas revenues through the BC Petroleum Corporation. Because our gas is too dear at the border and we don't have a take-or-pay clause, whereas Alberta has a take-or-pay clause. Right. And I'm very impressed by Waddle of the NDP, who says you've no right to do that pre-build from Alberta to the States unless you fulfill your contractual commitments to bring American gas from Alaska to replace that gas.
Well, there are 2 points in your statement. First of all, on the take-or-pay clause, obviously this has nothing to do with the federal government. Right. This is a matter that has taken place between British Columbia Corporation and the American customers. And I hope that we will be able to see a pickup in sales of Canadian British Columbia gas to the United States. As far as the pre-built itself, this is a difference of interpretation and point of view, obviously, between Mr. Waddell and ourselves. We have stated quite clearly that pre-built was authorized and could be authorized only within the context of the construction of a total project. And this is the way we have approved it. We think it is going to be of great benefit to Canada as a whole and the West in particular. And we have got commitments from the United States President and the United States Congress that they are going to see to it that the whole line is built. Mr. Waddell doesn't believe that the whole line will be built. I suppose we'll have to, I'm convinced that it will be, but events in the next 2 or 3 years will provide, will show who is right and who is wrong.
You are confident there will be, or is now, a commitment to build the whole line?
Absolutely, and the United States need that gas, and there's no doubt about it. They are going to be in an impossible situation if they don't build that line between now and 1985.
Coal deal, the coal deal.
Yes.
Are you going to make a deal through the provincial government to give them the necessary subsidies to subsidize Japanese coal exports from here?
We've stated quite categorically, and I repeat it, that there is no way we are going to put ourselves in a situation of subsidizing Japanese industry at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer. No way. If, however, there are ways and means of going ahead with capital expenditure that are going to be paid back through the sale of coal to the Japanese, and if the Japanese are going to pay for the cost of that coal and the infrastructure, great, we're for it, and we're eager to see that happen.
In other words,
but no, I mean, it would be crazy to subsidize Japanese industry with good Canadian taxpayers' money.
Well, isn't that what's on the horizon at the moment? Isn't that what the provincial government wants to do? Get money from you to help close the gap between, what is it, $70 and $80 a ton?
Yeah, it appears that indeed this is what the provincial government has tried to get, but we have refused to go along this route, and I don't think we will change that policy. I think it's the right policy to follow, and I think the people of Canada and the people of British Columbia themselves
You've gone as far as you will go in the harbour facilities in the north and the support of the CN New Spur.
I know that there are still discussions taking place, and I wouldn't like to preclude the final conclusions, to presume the final conclusions of those discussions, but what I wanted to be quite clear is that it would not make any sense to have Canadians subsidize Japanese industry to compete with us.
How about a couple of phone calls on the collapse of the talks?
I would be very happy to have them.
Because only you and I and the politicians care about the gas, the oil. But I don't know. I'd like to know what people think. Just briefly and succinctly.
I'll be very happy.
With questions to you on this Saturday's tragedy. And everybody to blame. Trudeau's a tough guy again now. Gosh, he scares me witless when he puts on his tough act. After the break. And then there's Kelowna and Port Hardy. Marc Lalonde was smiling because I was telling the callers, and so was Gladys, no niceties, straight to the point, we haven't got that much time. And after all, you are a Liberal from the East.
I love the West.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Lalonde, I was very upset as a Canadian not to see any progress really made last week by the provincial premiers and the Prime Minister and yourselves. I think there was far too much political playing before the cameras, and probably another session should be called, and no camera shots be taken, because the actors were great, but the content was very little in front of the cameras.
What do you think of that?
I would have to agree with that. I think there is a public education value in having the premiers and the Prime Minister putting their case forward, but if you want to have real bargaining and I think more fruitful discussions, I think we should have less public debate like this, because there is too much posturing, as the caller said. I have to agree with him.
And Trudeau wins the posturing anyway.
Well, but that doesn't matter. What is important is that we make progress, and I think having all First Ministers before television all the time is not the best way of making
Thank you.
progress.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Lalonde, Jack passed a remark in regards to the oil companies need more money to expand the tar sands and what have you. And as far as I can understand, the newspapers I read and editorials that these oil companies are very embarrassed in their profits now, and then they get these men on the air and they can't explain them about their 200%, 300%. What do you say to this? What's the good of more money?
Yes, indeed. The companies have been doing very well indeed. And I agree with you. I've released recently a report that shows that they are doing very well.
Well, what do they need more money for then to expand the tar sands? I mean, it's not going into expansion.
Well, what is delaying? The problem at the present time is that the government of Alberta, as you know, has refused to approve the expansion of the tar sands plants or building of new tar sands plants until they had a total agreement with the federal government. I frankly find this regrettable because this has delayed already for over a year the beginning of some of those plants.
Yes, but they're not putting their money into other provinces, neither these huge products.
Well, I must say in fairness that they are reinvesting quite a lot of those profits that they have made into the oil industry. But still, unfortunately, there are a few cases where there appears to be branching out into other areas or shipping of probably too many dividends to the United States.
Can you not control that? Or do we just have a 15% withholding tax or something?
Well, I don't think we can control that at the present time in the way you're talking about. There are just a taxation system, and I don't think we should start introducing this type of control on dividend payments.
Go ahead from Kelowna.
Yes, I'd like to see a united country of the free provinces, simply because I'm sick and tired of the federal union of Ontario colonies. We're not Ontario's colonies. We don't want to be Ontario colonies, and we will not be. We are going to be in a position to have a say in this country.
I quite agree with you, and I don't think any premier feels that he's somewhat a prisoner of Ontario. I don't think the facts bear out what you're saying.
Matter of fact,
I think they do. I think our history in the West has borne it out over and over and over. And Mr. Trudeau had better learn that we are not his slaves. We are not Bill Davis's slaves. We are our own people.
Thank you, ma'am.
I quite agree.
As a matter of fact, Davis didn't look that good at the conference, if you accept my interpretation of it. Go ahead, please, from Port Hardy.
Okay, I'm phoning because I'm really ticked off about this business of the minority language rights. I hear all the time, Christian again on the morning going on about how there's only supposedly English people and French people in Canada. Well, the part of Vancouver I grew up in, I'm aware that there's more people, especially in Vancouver, who speak Chinese, Italian, German, and they don't even talk about them. They don't even implement some kind of form of making sure that they can learn good English in the schools. I know for a fact that...
Oh, ma'am, surely to goodness you're not going now to official language for Chinese, Gaelic.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I just get pissed off because they...
Oh, mind your language, ma'am.
Excuse me. I get ticked off because they go on and on about these... They seem to just ignore the fact that there's other people.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm not going into the multicultural bit because I show myself as not that keen on multiculturalism. Mm-hmm. We accept the two founding languages. This all, of course, proves that your Official Languages Act was really a failure.
No, I don't agree with that. I have to disagree with that with you. Obviously, there are people that have disagreed or felt that it was not implemented properly. But in terms of the total effect of what we were trying to achieve, I think the Commissioner of Official Languages himself said that
I was not a bit surprised at the failure of the talks. I've been listening to a lot of ministers that have come out here from the East, and we've had a lot of our own people discussing over the radio and TV with different issues, and I myself have had quite an education in this, and I feel, Mr. Lalonde, that Mr. Trudeau should have had another, from the West, another Machiavellian mind there, so that we could have had true representation from the West. The West pays a lot of taxes and we don't have real representation, and we pay, as an ordinary housewife, we pay a lot for our goods and services from the East, sir.
She doesn't like Ray Perot.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think, you know, there is a lot of that rhetoric, that type of rhetoric that we've just heard, and I've been in the West so many times over the last 10 years, and there's some justification for it, but I cannot help deplore the fact that so many Western politicians and Western people, I think, are not making an effort to have a more balanced view of things. Of course, we're all paying taxes, and of course, the areas of the people that are better off are paying more taxes. But that's the same thing all over Canada. You know, there is not a taxation system for the West and a taxation system for the East.
Yeah, but it's even more difficult to have a balanced view when you watch that performance on Saturday. Here we have 10 provincial premiers lined up basically in unison against the federal Prime Minister. We have some very snarky remarks. We have Trudeau on the prob, challenging them to pick him up, and I think only Lyon and Peckford picked him up. Even Blakeney didn't pick him up, you know. And people at home look at this and they think, my God, what's going on in this country?
Well, I think there's strong debates, and that is what is a strong democracy is all about, that you have strong views. But, you know, the view that somehow there is a conspiracy in Ottawa by the government or those politicians in Ottawa to literally milk the West is something that is just not true and does not correspond to the history of this
Trudeau
country.
is going to patriate the Constitution through the House of Commons, is he not?
I hope so, but we will have to see what the decision will be once the consultations have to start.
And you were
finished.
told in this confidential document, you should understand that the fight in Parliament and the country will be very, very rough.
Yes, it could be.
Did your people leak this, or did somebody steal it?
I am sure it wasn't leaked. It had to be somebody who, for his own purpose,
did you notice the
decided
interesting
to release
thing?
it.
The leak
But
of the leak of the pit.
several premiers have said it's a good document.
But the leak of the Pitfield document went first into the hands of the Quebec delegation.
Yes.
So you've still got separatists inside who are supplying these documents to embarrass the federal government.
I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure this is the case.
Webster and Marc Lalonde after the news. After the break. Marc Lalonde is the Federal Minister of Energy and the leader of the Quebec wing of the Liberal Party. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Lalonde?
Yes.
I'm a Liberal, and I've been all across Canada. I came to this country 11 years ago, and I speak both languages, French and English. And the thing is, I've liked Trudeau very much, the way he governs this country, and I've campaigned for Ken Robinson in Lake Shore, Ontario.
What's your point?
And I'd like to say that I'd like to see things moving a little quicker. You know, I think the whole government of Canada is on a very slow proceed now, and I think it would be better for a budget is, I think it's due for quite a long time.
Thank you. Probably just as slow in French as he is in English. Go ahead, from where?
Yes, from Vancouver.
Go ahead.
Yes, to Mr. Lalonde and Mr. Webster. I'm more convinced than ever that politicians are not the people to deal with questions pertaining to something that has a general picture, and they are trying to focus on their own constituency because they're dependent upon them to be re-elected. And this is how I feel.
What do you want, a dictatorship?
I feel that it should be a committee of people representing Canada generally, not representing a specific area.
Constituent Assembly. Is that in any way feasible or practical for this country in this day and age?
I don't think it's feasible or realistic, frankly.
Neither do I. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Lalonde, I agree with Jack. Trudeau was definitely out of step with the 10 premiers.
Oh, no, I can do that.
Out of step with Canadians. And consequently, he doesn't qualify as a Canadian Prime Minister. Last night...
I didn't say that.
You said he was out of step with the 10...
I said he was tough, and it was a confrontation between 10 of them and him.
One side and the 10 premiers on the other. And the 10 premiers came through as real Canadians as we see Canada. And Trudeau seemed to be the one who wasn't. And this, I feel he should resign.
Thank you, ma'am. Did the
I
provinces...
have to disagree, obviously, with that.
Did the provinces offer anything to the federal government in these rounds of talk?
Nothing.
Must have offered something.
Well, it was in public. You've seen, tell me what they did offer.
I mean, they took family law. There was an agreement on family law.
Yes, but that's something that the federal government was offering to them.
For whatever reason, we need family law.
Sure. But we offered, I mean, that was a federal transfer of power to the province.
Changing the Supreme Court.
Again, more powers to the regions, and something that the provinces were ready and willing to, wanted to have.
Not all that important, actually.
Well, it was put on the agenda as one item of importance to the provinces. We agreed to have it on the agenda.
Fisheries, there was no agreement at all.
Yes, but we were ready to offer again a transfer of responsibilities to the provinces, but they didn't agree between themselves, but we offered it to them.
Did you make any moves? Yes, you had made a move to increase your hold on the economy with power. The financial side of the economy.
It was not so much increasing the hold, the federal hold on the economy, than guaranteeing that no federal or provincial law would interfere with the mobility of people and capital across this country. So it was reducing the powers of both the federal and the provincial government. So it was not a transfer. On the economic union, we wanted to get for the Canadians to be more mobile across this country freely. It was not something coming to the federal government.
Suggesting to me that these picayune restrictions in Newfoundland, Alberta, perhaps Nova Scotia, certainly Ontario and Quebec, are a real hindrance to employment of people from other provinces?
Very definitely.
Oh, Fort Murray in Alberta is full of people from Newfoundland.
Yes, but you try and, as a nurse, to move from British Columbia to Ontario or vice versa, and you'll find yourself in difficulty.
You've got to live there for so long before I can apply for a job.
There are all kinds of rules and restrictions.
Well, I'm very sorry that all you politicians muffed it. We're going to have to sit through it again till long after I'm retired. My thanks to Marc Lalonde, Minister of Energy. After the break. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. precisely, I open the case of Pete Pauls and the mystery surrounding his arrest in Penticton and his admission to an extended care hospital. Here is Pete Pauls in the extended care unit at Kelowna. He has irreparable brain damage. He can neither speak nor use his right arm. Was he allowed to sit in a Penticton police cell for 24 hours after his arrest before being admitted to hospital? Why has it taken nearly 4 months for the family to begin to find out what happened? And how did Pauls receive such a head injury that he now has irreparable brain damage? We're going to open the books on that one tomorrow morning and we'll follow through on it. What else tomorrow, Gladys?
We have more talk on the Constitution with Stan Roberts from Canada West Foundation, and whatever happened to Phil Ghilardi.
Well, that'll be bright at least. You know, a lot like him or lump him. Phil Ghilardi is bright. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely. The trade union dispute between the Building Trades Council and the non-union people seems for the moment to be over at Whistler. But there's a bigger issue, the jurisdictional fights between the I.W.A. and other industrial unions and the Building Trades Council. Tonight you're going to hear Dennis McDermott, President of the Canadian Labour Congress, deliver a very thinly veiled ultimatum to the building trades unions all across Canada. Also tonight, you're going to meet Nelson Riis, the NDP MP from Kamloops, and Marc Lalonde, the Federal Minister of Energy, on the Constitution and on energy and the price of gas and etc. after the break.